Thanks very much, Jacqueline. So I won't be too long here. We certainly had a great evening of speakers already, but I just wanted to draw your attention to some work that we're doing right now, trying to look at some feedlot and backgrounder benchmarking. If you joined us last week, you probably heard the wonderful presentation from Reynold Bergen about the cow-calf survey that was done just over a year ago. And in Canada, we haven't had a feedlot survey. And so this is one of the first national efforts to try and get some of that benchmarking data and hopefully, again, identify some best management practices and help the feedlot and backgrounding sector improve economic and environmental sustainability. And so the survey is very much a national effort. It's being led by Dr. Gabriel Ribeiro out of the University of Saskatchewan, but it has a team from right across the country, including other researchers from USask and University of Manitoba, Kim Ominski, as well as Tim McAllister and Stephanie Terry from Ag Canada. Brenna Grant from CanFax is helping us with some of the economics. And then here in Ontario, we have myself, my master's student, Megan St. Martin, and Megan Fanshake from OMAF helping with the Eastern Canada portion. As I said, this is a national effort and is funded by the Canadian Beef Science Cluster, which includes funds from AAFC and your checkoff dollars from Beef Cattle Research Council. So the survey or the project itself has got a couple parts, three parts, but the biggest part right now that I wanted to mention is the survey. So the survey is now live, and if you're a feedlot operator or a backgrounder, I would highly encourage you to follow the website there and take part in the survey. It does take about half an hour and it asks some questions about your feed management. So I may have to refresh maybe some of that information if you have a nutritionist that may have to help you fill out some of that as well. But we're looking at collecting information on your nutritional management and feeding practices. And with this data, we're hoping to establish a benchmark of practices for feedlots and backgrounding operations across Canada that we can use to maybe help with policy decisions and help direct things like life cycle analysis that, of course, are very important to policy making. And so the survey is now live now, and it should be available for another month or so. So highly encourage you to look at that. But the second part is a little bit taking a closer look at some sampling farms. And so we have a network of farms that we've been sampling feed and fecal samples from the past couple of months. And hopefully we're looking at drawing some relationships between our feed and feed management and what nutrients are excreted in the manure. I know some of our participating farms are in the audience today, so again, thank you so much for participating in that. It really is a key part of this project. But the third part of the study and kind of one of the end goals is trying to help develop some of these newer technologies to get on farm and in the hands of producers. And one of the ones we're looking at in this study is near infrared sampling or scanning. And so this is a tool that many feed labs and nutritionists use already. It is becoming less expensive. There are even some versions that are handheld now, and I've seen like some prototypes that even may plug into your phone. So eventually this technology will be very simple to use, very inexpensive relative to some other sampling techniques, and can be really easily adapted on farm. And so we're hoping to build prediction equations to look at things like fecal starch and other nutrients that may help producers make quick, rapid adjustments to their feeding management strategies on farm to hopefully improve production and efficiency. So what's an example of one of the things that maybe we can learn from this study? And for us, we're really interested in fecal starch. So, of course, when we feed cattle, right, we feed a high grain diet. We need that energy density to improve rates of gain and increase marbling. And so, with those rapidly fermentable carbohydrates, of course, we have a little bit of a challenge sometimes with uh, decreases in ruminal pH and increasing risk of ruminal acidosis and other associated disorders like liver abscesses and even some links to some respiratory diseases that some new research has shown. And so, one thing we've been learning over the past 10 years is this does not necessarily happen only in the rumen. I was involved in a study a couple years ago where we looked at other parts of the lower GI tract to see where there is inflammation and barrier dysfunction, so creating gaps in the gut where those bacteria that cause diseases like liver abscesses can actually enter into the bloodstream. And we identified that this can happen easily in the jejunum and cecum, which is part of the hindgut as well. And in fact, when I dissect some steers, and I do that quite often, we see a lot of inflammation in the hindgut. And so we know that this is not just a rumen issue. It can happen in the lower gut, particularly if we get high levels of starch reaching the cecum and where we get some secondary fermentation and some maybe some lesions on the gut as well. And so fecal starch also is a bit of a biomarker for digestibility of those nutrients that we feed the animal. And certainly, lots of studies have been looking at fecal starch. But one of the ones I want to highlight was a really applied study by Kim Sanford out of Lethbridge. And their team looked at barley grain and processing index of barley, essentially, and suggested that if the fecal starch has higher than 13% starch in the feces, there could be some changes in grain processing that could improve the digestibility and the energy utilization from those grains that we feed the animal. And they did some calculations and found that for every 1% increase in fecal starch, decreases the energetic value of that diet by 0.163 megacals per kilo. And so what that essentially means in real life terms, if you're feeding a steer that has fecal starch values of 18% versus one that does a better job of digesting that feed and has a fecal starch value of 10%, the energy difference between those two animals would require about 64% more barley. So simple changes in processing can even help us improve efficiency, let alone the impacts on gut health. And so hopefully the study that we're doing now in the national study will help us follow up on a study we did about 6 or 7 years ago, where we looked at some manure samples from 16 feedlots. And we found that keeping in mind that cutoff of about 13 or 12.5%, that about just under half of our feedlots had some room for improvement in terms of lowering their fecal starch. And a couple more were certainly in the maybe higher range. We looked in the US as well and found a survey out of Midwest, which also feeds corn-based diet. And they had values that were maybe even a little bit worse. About the average was 19% fecal starch and ranged from 7 to 34. So certainly that farm on that 34% fecal starch maybe could look at adapting some of the grain processing to improve the digestibility of that feed. And so hopefully we'll be able to see a shift towards some of those lower fecal starch values, hopefully as an indication of improved performance and digestibility of those nutrients. And so we hope to look at processing index and the relationship between fecal starch. Certainly this is a double-edged sword, right? Because if we grind these grains too fast, that certainly increases rate of fermentation and can increase the risk of acidosis and bloat. But if the rate of digestion is too slow, we end up with those undigested nutrients that end up in the feces as starch. And so through the study and the survey, hopefully we'll find a little bit more information on what the right balance between processing index and digestibility is, and be able to kind of develop some best management practices around that, and hopefully maximize digestibility and minimize risk of acidosis. And so, yeah, just like to quickly thank the Science Cluster Program for funding this project. And as I mentioned, the survey is live, so we hope to get as many survey responses from Ontario as we can. Certainly, we want to make sure that Ontario best management practices are well represented in our survey. So if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to do that survey, we would certainly appreciate that quite a bit. So I know we're getting close on time, Jacqueline, but happy to take any questions if there are any.
Great, thanks, Katie. I did pop in the chat there too, just the link to the information about the feedlot benchmarking study. As Katie said, we would really appreciate producers like yourselves taking the time to fill out that information. And I know oftentimes we wish Ontario and Eastern Canada was represented more in some of these research projects. And as Katie said, this is the way to do that, is to get your voice heard in some of those research results. So we would encourage you to take the time to complete that. We will make sure we share information as well in our email follow-up to all participants about that as well. We do have one question in here, Katie, regarding where roughage fits in reduction of fecal starch.
Yes, certainly there's a close relationship there as well. And we also ask a lot of questions about roughage source and roughage inclusion rate in the study as well. But certainly when we think about rate of passage and digestibility, higher forage certainly will slow that a little bit. And certainly it's like, again, the double-edged sword of how much roughage is enough. What is the right type of roughage? Is there a right particle size that roughage should be? And again, most of the research has been looking in the rumen only, but we're certainly learning that hindgut acidosis is maybe just as important, and maybe determining which type of forage, what characteristics of that forage matter in terms of improving gut health. So I don't have a specific number for that, but yeah, the classic research answer, it depends. Yeah.